It's about faith to believe. It's about hope to receive. It's about love to give life. It's about transplant life with me, Miss Vinnie.
Tenaya talks government with Miss Vinnie. After the press conference, what's next? Watch this special episode.
So no policy changes were made directly out of those New York Times claims, which makes me happy also because I think, it was like the government sort of looked at this and was like, yeah, we don't want to terrify people even more. And if we stop DCD donation, it's going to kill people. So
Hey everyone, it's Miss Vinnie, and I am here this morning for a very special About Transplant Life meeting with my dear friend, the policy expert herself, Tenaya Wallace. Thank you for joining me this morning, Tenaya.
Thank you for having me.
Whenever I have questions about policy and, government, things of that nature, I always think about you because I know you are on top of everything that's going on within the transplant community. You are our celebrity expert when it comes to that, right?
It's interesting because after so many years of doing public education, there wasn't much policy around organ donation, right? We've kind of regulated our system. We made policies through the OPTN, but these last few years, it's been a whole different world for us all.
And policy is the new catchphrase up there in Washington, but the problem is it affects millions and millions of lives in this country, right? And so we are in a historic moment, and I just think that it's so important that we document everything that's taking place so that people, later on, they can go back and they can learn from all of the research and all of the wonderful things that you are doing, because some of the things that you post on LinkedIn are just so informative. So I want to talk about that. And today we're talking about the recent press conference with Secretary Kennedy and Dr. Oz. That was on Thursday, September the 18th, right?
Yes.
And they dropped some bombs on us. So let's talk about it. Did you watch the press conference?
So it was 7 a.m. Pacific time live, and there was a link to watch it live. So I watched it in bed. Like I just flipped open my computer, and then I realized there was a lot of stuff happening, and so I just opened up LinkedIn and started to kind of live discuss, just post exactly what they were saying without any analysis, really, just so that I remember some of the things some of the lines, some of the phrasing. I think the big directive was that they were shutting down an organ procurement organization in Miami, but they said a lot of other things under that I thought were little clues into where they might be going next.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And the OPO that they are talking about decertifying is Life Alliance, right? In Jacksonville, Florida.
It's in Miami. Yeah,
is it Miami?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the few OPOs that was actually associated with the hospital. So there's different ways that organ procurement organizations can exist in the world. Most of them are independent nonprofit organizations, but there were a few that many started along with a hospital when they were first created. And Life Alliance is one of those that continued to be part of a hospital network, which could have been one of the reasons why it was more difficult to run an OPO that way, because you have to actually run it through the hospital, the larger hospital structure as well. But they decertified Life Alliance. I think in a lot of ways, many of the OPOs were like, oh, okay. Um, there
So
are,
decertified, what does that mean? And is it a done deal?
that's a good, see, this is why, Miss Vinnie,
I
this is why I talk to
know what
you.
to ask, don't I?
Ask the questions, the right
Yeah.
questions. Okay, so there's a cycle that OPOs go through where it's like, I don't know how many years, but every few years they go under they come under government scrutiny, right? The government looks at whether or not they're functioning correctly. And CMS, which is what Dr. Oz is under, that is the agency, Center for Medicare and Medicaid and Medicare Studies, that is the agency that certifies or decertifies organ procurement organizations. One of the things that has become more aware, and people become more aware of, is that it's very rare for CMS to decertify an organ procurement organization. There may be challenges within that OPO. So for this OPO in particular, they identified staffing challenges as one of the issues, that they were just consistently understaffed, didn't have enough staffing. So issues like that. Um, so
But what does it mean though? Does it mean they can't function at all?
well, if you notice towards the end of the press conference, I think it was one of the reporters that asked, see, Miss Vinnie should have been in the room with them.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Is there just no organ procurement organization serving the Miami area? That would be weird, because
Right.
that's a big area. They said no, that the OPO would continue to run. Um, it can be challenged. So another organ procurement organization can basically bid for that space. So potentially what will happen is there's 4 OPOs, I think, in Florida. So potentially one of those existing nonprofits could bid to take over that service area, the Miami area. Because it was associated with a hospital before, I don't know how that's going to work, but essentially they can take over the area. I don't think anything has really happened, because you
Mm.
still need a functioning OPO to be there. It's not like they just went out of business like that.
Right, because people get transplanted every single day. So how you just gonna shut
Yes, exactly.
down? Yeah.
Exactly. And transplants don't happen without the OPO working with the donor families and running the donation system. So to shut down a very large populated area and not have an organ procurement organization, that would be very bad for patients. That doesn't seem to be what's going to happen. But I think really what this is about, I don't actually think it was about this one OPO.
Hmm.
I think that because of the New York Times and their, crazy, I don't know, messaging around DCD and putting people's fears that
Yes,
it won't
that's
work
the
as hard to
word.
save you, creating those fears. They had then this Energy and Commerce Committee hearing, which also reiterated all of this fantasy and fairy tale and fears. And so, of
Good
course,
fantasy and fairy tale.
and fears, fantasy, fairy tale.
Years, yeah. And
Um,
that's what it is. So yeah, that's good.
of course, RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and Dr. Oz, as the head of CMS, of course they had to do something. You can't create public fear about the organ donation system and then the government not take any action. So the action that they took was to shut down Life Alliance, which was not one of the OPOs that was like in the news at all, right? There was a Kentucky,
Yeah, that's why I
Alabama.
thought it was weird. I'm like, why they picking on Life Alliance like that? What they do?
Exactly.
They don't have enough staff. They don't have enough money to hire people. Is that the problem?
And who knows why the lack of staff? Like I said, it is associated with a large hospital associate. So staffing has to go through a different kind of process. It's not just its own independent nonprofit like most OPOs. So I don't know. I mean, and potentially this was an issue, but it does seem strange. It felt like they had to do something so they took an OPO that had some actual demonstrable, like you can demonstrate some issues that they had, like with staffing,
Yeah.
and you decertify it mid-cycle, which has never been done before. So it was sort of this like big news because this had never been done before. And so it was to show the public that the government is taking action
Mhm.
around, to assure that the organ donation system is, the best in America, and we're going to decertify this random Miami OPO.
And then they want to talk about rebuilding trust
Yeah,
in the donation system. I'm like,
I will.
really?
I will say, I do think I my perspective of it was like, okay, the public had started removing themselves off of donor registries. The government realized, oh, this is bad. This is going to kill
Mhm.
patients. And
Mhm.
so they had to come out with something to say something. The other thing, if you listened, RFK Jr. told this very moving story about how his nephew was an organ donor.
Hmm.
And he literally said it did so much for his family to be able to give that gift. Like it was such an important part of the healing process, which is what we always say about donation, right? It helps the patient who needs a transplant, but it's also really healing for the family to give in this way and to honor someone's legacy. So he talked about that. He did say that they were in a regional hospital and didn't have an organ procurement organization, which is
Which makes no sense.
that makes no sense. And it was interesting because I posted that on LinkedIn and I got a direct message from the coordinator who worked with that family. So we know
Wow.
that there was an OPO. We know that there was an OPO coordinator that was working on that case. So that was weird. It was like this weird little dig to the OPOs. It's like the donation is amazing, but we didn't have an OPO. It's like obviously you did, or the donation wouldn't have
It
happened.
wouldn't have happened. You
And
dimwit.
then we also heard Dr. Oz, which he doesn't talk that much about being a heart lung surgeon. Like he's a heart transplant surgeon. And we know him as Dr. Oz on television, but he's a heart
Mhm.
surgeon. He
I
has,
didn't know he was a heart transplant surgeon.
yes,
Wow.
he talked about going on runs, like flying in the snow to go out to recover the organ and bring it back for his patient. And he talked about how, moving that was. And so that was really interesting too. So you had RFK Jr. talking about the donation side and how beautiful it was and how important it was. And you talked about Dr. Oz talking about the sanctity of life and how important transplant is and, seeing patients thrive and all of it sounded like a PSA for organ donation. And I was like, oh my God, the government has been trashing the system and now they're going to
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like,
yeah,
why didn't you say that before thousands of people took their names off the list? Now we have to rebuild their trust.
right.
That made no sense to me
Yeah.
at all whatsoever. I'm like, really? Okay, you starting to see dollars and cents though. And so now you got to
I
put a
don't know.
band-aid on.
I think that they realized that if people really remove themselves off the registry, we're going to have even more of a public health crisis than we already do in transplant. So
Mhm.
it was a very pro transplant, pro donation kind of press conference. I was very happy that they didn't blow up the system and stop donation after cardiac death or stop, demonize out of sequence or eliminate normothermic perfusion. And these are three things that the New York Times has put questions about. So no policy changes were made directly out of those New York Times claims,
Oh,
which makes
good.
me happy also because I think, uh, it was like the government sort of looked at this and was like, yeah, we don't want to terrify people even more. And if we stop DCD donation, it's going to kill people. So I thought
Mhm.
I think that was the first reaction from everyone in the donation space was like, oh God, okay, good. They're not blowing up the system. But we had there was rumors the day before that that's exactly what the government was going to do. That's what the professional associations thought was going to happen. That's what a lot of the leaders in the donation space thought was going to happen. So it's interesting that we were so off base. And it
Mm.
kind of, to me, shows that we don't have a good conduit within the government space, because we were really off base with what we thought was going to happen.
Hmm. So you're saying there's a lack of communication between the organ procurement organizations, well, the transplant community and the
And
government.
yeah. So, I mean, AOPO, which is the association, the professional association for the OPOs, and AST and ASTS, which is the professional associations for the transplant side, none of us really had a real clue about what was going to happen. So I thought that was interesting that we were definitely out of the loop, but so that I was surprised about that. Um, I thought it was really interesting. One of the things that you heard is that the speakers mentioned someone in particular, a Dr. Lynch, multiple times.
Hmm.
They even had Dr. Lynch come up on stage at the end with Suma McNair. Suma is the administrator for HRSA, and Dr. Lynch has become the HRSA Department of Transplant administrator. So the
What's
head.
HRSA for our viewers that don't know what that is?
Oh God, Health Resources Services Administration, and it's
Okay,
sort of,
very good.
it's, there's HHS is above, so that's Secretary, Kennedy, and then it has multiple branches. One is CMS, one is HRSA, and then under HRSA lives transplantation, and under CMS lives oversight of the organ procurement organization. So even in how we are regulated by the government, donation and transplantation are in two separate agencies, and that's why we saw Dr. Oz there under CMS. But what I thought was interesting was that Dr. Lynch was he was thanked multiple times by the speakers. He was brought up on stage. Dr. Lynch was one of the surgeons that really opposed broader liver sharing. So there was a time where livers were kept very regional. And
Mm.
so he was in one of those southern hospitals that received a lot of livers because it was in the stroke belt. It's where it's in the area where Steve Jobs went, right? In that stroke belt area. When they kept their livers, then those
There's
centers.
a section of the country called Stroke Belt.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
new to me. I wonder
Yeah,
if
it's where a
anybody.
lot of people have strokes. And so,
Wow.
they die at ages 50 to 65, right?
Where is this area at?
It kind of cuts through the southern states.
All that
And
fried chicken and grease and oil, yeah. Fat back and all that ham hocks. Wow. I
yeah,
promise you I never heard of that. That's crazy.
no, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's commonly understood, but so this surgeon, Dr. Lynch, didn't want to share livers, and the OPTN made the decision to create broader liver sharing, which has helped increase the number of livers available and number of transplants, and has been a really good policy. But he kind of joined forces with Organize early on. So Organize was kind of like opposed to all of this OPO stuff, and Dr. Lynch and his buddies were opposed to a bunch of things happening at the UNOS level. So all these attacks that we've seen on UNOS and breaking up UNOS and the OPTN board and being new and not being able to have anyone from UNOS on it, all this HRSA modernization stuff, the opening up bidding contracts, that's really been driven by Dr. Lynch, but he's been a close associate with Organize, and now works for the federal government making transplant policy. So I think it was something that was subtle to anyone just watching, and probably even the reporters don't really know who Dr. Lynch is. But he was thanked several times on stage from the podium from the speakers, and then brought up at the end as part of the photo at the very end, like, Dr. Lynch, come up. Yeah. So that was that was interesting. So it
Girl,
kind of
we need to write a movie about this. This is juicy. I mean, I feel like I'm listening to a Dateline or a First 48 script or something. This
I'm so
real life.
I
This
feel like
real life.
I'm crazy too because I feel like I'm making it feels so conspiracy theory, but it's
Yeah.
right there. It was literally in the press conference. I was like, okay, I see what's happening. I wrote some notes. I felt like I was grateful that felt like the point of the press conference was to show the public that top officials do have faith in the system. So it was sort of like diffusing the chaos that they
They
were
pause.
exactly. I don't yes, and that's part of why I was like, oh my God, you're diffusing chaos that you created. Um, it was strange at the end when a reporter asked about the Kentucky case and they were just like weirdly vague and they were like, no, we've got that under control. Like we're putting in oversight and everything. It was almost, that Star Wars thing, like these are not the droids you're looking for, like nothing to see here.
Like Men in
So,
Black when they point that taser at you and you
yeah,
forget.
exactly.
You
Exactly.
will not remember that.
Yeah, no, we're decertifying an OPO in Miami, so don't worry about the Kentucky
Mhm,
case or anything else
mhm.
that was in the news. Um, yeah, it was sort of we're dealing with it, and I was like, okay. Um, there were several organizations and associations sort of congratulating and commending HHS and in part because we were really glad that they didn't just eliminate DCD donation and start killing patients. So there was just so much relief that it was like, oh, okay, we applaud
Mhm.
what they did today. Um, but there were a few things that I heard that sounded like threats and not veiled threats, but threats to the OPO. One was federal oversight is coming down the pike. It's tough love. I said,
Yeah, that's a threat.
we're going to be tougher than ever before. We're sending a tough message to all the other OPOs. And I love this one. They said, there's a new sheriff in town and we're coming for them. So the OPOs, it was interesting too, because Dr. Oz was like, but many OPOs are doing a great job. Many OPOs are doing a great job. We just want to make sure that the ones who aren't are held accountable. And it's like, okay. I did notice that they did not talk about the CMS final rule, which is the policy that is going to, potentially shut down 2/3 of the OPOs in March of 2026 next year. It
March.
was not a March, April, May, somewhere in there. Um, there was no mention of it. They didn't talk about it at all. They didn't say a single word. They did say we're going to be tougher, that there's a new sheriff in town, but they didn't say, the upcoming CMS final rule will assure that we hold OPOs accountable. They never mentioned their own policy, which was interesting. That was, I mean, I think that was an omission by they meant to not talk about it. So that was
Mhm.
very interesting. I also heard them say that they want to put more decision making in the hands of physicians because of poor decision making around organ utilization. That sounds good, right? Put the decision making into the hands of physicians because of better organ utilization. But what that is like a direct connection back to Dr. Lynch, who didn't want to do broader organ sharing because he
Mhm.
wanted to control the organs. It's the same with out of sequence offers. When we have an out of sequence offer, we direct it to which we don't just let the physicians have full bore over who gets the next organ. And that's sort of what Dr. Lynch wants. He wants more power over who gets the organs put in the hands of the physician and not the OPO and potentially not UNOS. And
But doesn't that open the door to favoritism and
yeah,
mhm.
so that again, there were these subtle things that sounded reasonable, But then when you see where they were coming from or who they were relating to or what that might actually mean, that may actually mean that we're going to reassess broader distribution of organs or continuous distribution of organs. It may impact how we do out of sequence. Um, it has Dr. Lynch's fingerprints all over it. That statement that we want to put things in the hands of physicians. And again, it sounds very reasonable, except for the fact that like the donation and transplant system isn't all about what is best for the surgeon.
Right.
This is a public utility. It is
That's best
meant
for the patient.
and meant for patients nationally. It's really
Right.
intended to best serve everyone in the nation. And we have to, that's interesting. The other thing they said is we shouldn't be flying over a hospital where there is a patient to take that organ to another patient, right? So if there's a patient at the hospital next door to where there's a donor, we shouldn't be flying that organ, to
But that organ might not be compatible for the patient in the hospital next door.
right.
Come on now.
Might not be the
They
best
don't
fit,
know
might
nothing
not
about
be
organ
willingness.
donation, do they?
Right. But this goes back to, if you hear it through Dr. Lynch's ears, this goes back to keeping the organs in a geographic space, giving the surgeons more control over them, and potentially eliminating or reconsidering broader distribution. So those were things that sounded not bad. Like it didn't raise any alarms like this is going to be horrible for the system. All of those sounded pretty good, but this very tough on OPO messaging that they said multiple times, and then also these kind of indicators that how the organs are going to be distributed may change, were part of the press conference as well.
I think we need to start a campaign, and you should run for Secretary of Health next time. When is his term up? Let's get this dude out of
Well, he's an appointed position. That was another thing that was interesting. It was political as well. The press conference. It was a lot of like the Biden administration ignored all of these things, and so the Trump administration is going to be tougher on this stuff, which I'm fine. I mean, that's politics in America.
Right.
I don't think that this is anything necessarily that the Biden administration, I don't think any of these issues are because of the Biden administration. Actually, it's like this whole campaign and all of these changes that have happened started under Obama, went under Trump one, carried through Biden, and then are coming through on Trump too. So this policy, I don't know, glacier that's been moving slowly towards us, has moved through 4 administrations and both on the left and the right. So it really has kind of become this very bipartisan thing. But, I think it was smart for them to also use that as a public trust element. Like Biden's eye wasn't on this, but under the Trump administration, we're going to be looking out for you and looking out for the system. So I think again, they use the politics in a way to help create more public trust in the system. And ultimately, I really do think that that's what they were trying to do on Thursday. I thought it was kind of funny. I was like, don't be terrified.
Well, they certainly got the attention of America, did they not? They got our attention.
Got the attention of America, exactly. And I don't know I don't really understand what the goal was. I think it was to demonize OPOs, right? With the whole Kentucky case and all that kind of stuff. It was to make people afraid of organ procurement organizations and get the government to eliminate or decertify more organ procurement organizations. But the real impact was on the general public, and the government realized, we can't be having that.
Nope.
No.
No, because that blood will be on their hands.
Yes. Yes,
Wow.
exactly. That they could really see a dramatic decrease in the number of transplants and the number of patients dying after we have worked so hard for so many years. The OPOs and the transplant centers, really collaboratively looking at all the issues in our system and trying to find the very best solutions. The other thing, they mentioned another statistic that I thought was random. I've talked before about the fact that there were 9,000 discarded kidneys last year. They
Yeah.
used the number 28,000. They said,
Thousand. Yeah, I heard about that. Oh my God, that is so not true, right?
I don't know where they're getting this number. And that's the thing too, is like there was no question afterwards of like, how'd you get to 28,000? And they did not release any documents talking about how they got to 28,000. So yeah, I don't know where the 28,000 came from. Again, it sort of was used in a way to make the OPOs look like they don't know what they're doing. And that's really been the campaign, right? The organized campaign, which has now become the government's campaign, is to blame the OPOs and to act like they're doing something wrong as the reason why, there's 100,000 people on the waiting list and people die waiting and all those kinds of things. And it's as all issues, it's much more complicated than that. But I do think that the 28,000 was a really random number. And that there was another, yeah, yes. And
Totally out of
the
pocket.
organs discarded is an issue. It is an issue. It's because organ procurement organizations have been going after every organ because of the CMS final rule. And it's also a problem because transplant centers are very cautious because they are measured by outcomes and 1-year outcomes, like if somebody dies in 1 year, right? And so they want to make sure that they're getting the very best organs. So a lot of this explosion of the number of organs is because of DCD donation. It's because of the CMS final rule. And it's because the transplant centers don't really know how to utilize organs that have a higher KDPI. They are not as they're not as good of organs, right? So
Yeah.
how does the transplant center deal with that? And all of those issues are being discussed by very smart people and researched and discussed at the conferences and, things like that. But yeah, I don't know where the 28,000 came from. It felt like a scare tactic, another scare
Yeah.
tactic.
Yeah. So what's the call to action for those of us who are advocates for organ donation and concerned citizens, patients who might be waiting on the transplant list, donor family members who are concerned? What's the message that we send to them?
I working in the communications world, like I worked in policy, but I always felt like policy changes only when people who are impacted by the issue take action. And
Mm,
so I came to public education and do public education work because it was all about making sure that people who care about a cause are the ones pushing policy. And so coming from that space and not having a good answer for you of like, what should we do? It doesn't jive together, right? Like I wish I could say, do this. I think that right now, what people can do is to help their friends and family not be scared of the donation and transplant system.
yeah.
And
And
I
to
do
stay informed, right? To watch videos like this
videos
with
like
Tenaya
this.
Wallace and Miss Vinnie.
Yes,
And so
and
it's up to
question
you.
what you're seeing in the media. Really,
Yeah.
like after this New York Times, it's like I would love to think that the New York Times was actually giving the public good information that they could utilize, and yet I'm seeing them really distort a lot of things. There's a lot of distortion in the media on the left, on the right, in the center, like everywhere there's distortion. So I think, don't blow things out of proportion.
Right.
And I think for the patient community, don't lose faith in the OPO system and in your OPOs because you're hearing something from the government, right?
Mhm.
They are not your enemy. They're your partner in getting transplanted. and don't just assume the worst of the opioid system because that's what you're hearing, because you're hearing what they want you to hear. And the opioids are having a hard time breaking through that noise and defending themselves. Frankly, I don't think they do a very good job at it. But on the backside, I see the work that the opioids are doing to assure that the system is fair and that people are getting transplanted and that families are being approached about donation and that organs are being offered. That is the real work of the opioid. So I would say, don't blow things out of proportion. If you're a patient, don't get scared. Don't get scared. Don't live in fear. Know that the system and, AOPO, ASTS, the associations are working on good policy. And I don't know. I don't know if there's a call to action to Dr. Oz or RFK Jr. at this point,
Yeah.
as patients. If you want to send them, go onto their websites, or there's probably a way to email them. I probably can find it, and just say, I'm a patient and I have faith in the system. And I
Yeah.
would say, if you work with an OPO, if you are a volunteer, because if you're a patient and you're active, it's the OPO who's probably running your volunteer program.
Mhm.
I would stand up for them. I would stand up for them. I've worked with One Legacy for 10 years as a patient advocate, as an advocate for donation in the field, and I see that they are doing an amazing job. And they really care about patients as well as donor families.
And
Don't
I
get
think the OPO should, I was an ambassador for almost 9 years and never heard of any of this stuff, you know, and we are, you know, on the front line, doing our grassroots efforts right there with the public, with the people who are signing up, to become registered organ donors. And I think that they should utilize the ambassadors and the volunteers that they have. And we are many, you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? To, stand up and come together and unite and make our voices heard. I don't see that
I
unification within the
they
volunteers,
they are, but
at all.
they're doing it because they're trying to protect you. They're
Well,
doing
they're
it.
not protecting us, they're hurting us.
And I think that's the thing. The shift has to happen. And maybe this is it, Miss Vinnie. Maybe the call to action really is, if you're a patient and you work closely with your OPO, contact your volunteer coordinator, whoever your point person is, and say, I am tired of hearing about things from the government about what the OPOs are doing. I want to advocate
Yep.
on behalf of this OPO that has served me well, that serves my community well, that does all of these events, that takes care of these donor families. I want to advocate for you on the policy front. Activate me. And I think
Mm.
I think it actually may take the volunteers asking the OPOs for that kind of activation versus the OPOs wanting to activate them. They're afraid that Organize is going to come after them for using their volunteers.
Oh.
They're
I knew
afraid
there was I knew there was a reason why they didn't tell us.
they're
Okay,
getting
so that's the
they're
reason.
afraid that it will be distorted.
Uh,
So it can't be distorted if you guys are asking for it. It can't
right.
be distorted if the volunteers themselves are going to their OPOs and saying, look, activate me politically. Have a strategy, just like you train me to do high school education programs.
Right. We should
Just
have been trained about policies and procedures. No, seriously, because
and had a
we
lot,
are very
had a
intelligent
lot.
people.
Exactly.
Many of us, after we have our transplants, we go on to start these nonprofit organizations. Do you know how many nonprofit organizations are being ran by recipients and
Yes,
donor family members?
yes, I
No
do. I know them
organization,
all.
right? There's thousands upon thousands of us in every state in this country. And I don't know, maybe, we need to put out a call to action and say, y'all better speak up because, your nonprofits are in danger.
Yes.
Right? Your communities are in danger. Your
And
state is in danger.
they've already, a lot of
Yeah.
these nonprofit organizations used to, many probably still do, get funded by organ procurement organizations. When the government started kind of cracking down and being like, they came after One Legacy for the Rose Parade float, right? Like, oh, they do a Rose Parade. No, we don't do a float. We do a, multi-billion dollar public education efforts for the cost of a float, right? That's what we do. We get billions of media impressions for the cost of a float, all across the country and all around the world. But because
I
they
was
were,
a writer on that float
I
too,
know
though.
you were. That's why I brought
Wow.
but when the OPO started to look at their funding and stop funding a lot of the nonprofit organizations that do really great work, in their service areas. And that's had a chilling effect on the different nonprofits that are being run by donor family members and transplant recipients as well. So we're already seeing the impacts of policy on these nonprofit organizations and on the volunteers. And I think leaving the volunteers out at this point is such a losing strategy.
Yep.
I haven't been able to break through. So I think it has to come from the patients themselves. If you are touched by donation and you work with an OPO, contact your OPO today and say you want a training around what's happening in policy. You want to be trained on how to be a lobbyist and how to advocate for the donation system and for the OPO system in particular.
Well, there you have it.
There you
That's
go.
our call to action.
We got there. We got there. That's why this works so well.
I just truly believe that everything is going to work out in the end. I really, really do. But we got to put some action to our faith. Because faith without works is just dead faith. And so, as we are praying for our nation as it relates to organ donation, we got to pray for our nation for so many things. So much is going on. But this one right here is truly affecting lives,
Yeah.
um, of the people who need it most. I
Yeah.
was one of those people. I was on my deathbed in 2014, and now I'm still here. And so that's what fuels me to be an advocate for those who are waiting on the transplant list. So thank you so much, Tenaya, for giving us,
Yeah.
information that we otherwise would not have known, and sharing your wisdom and your insight and your years of experience. You truly are a credible messenger, and I am so honored to have you as a resource for About Transplant Life.
Well,
And we're going to continue talking about this
I'm
because it's
so
so important.
grateful somebody wants to hear me talk because I do think that, it's an interesting space to be in this world, to not be personally touched by donation, to not be a donor family member, to not be a transplant recipient, to not be a clinical staff, and yet to work in this space since 2002 and see it from so many different angles and see what it's going through right now. And I have always been so committed to supporting transplant recipients, donor families, and helping you guys get what you need out of this system, and to really make the most out of your second chance at life, which comes from advocating for donation. And right now, advocating for donation means advocating and understanding the policy lens of things.
Mm-hmm. And we truly appreciate you. You are a survivor yourself. You are a cancer survivor, so you understand, you know, the warfare and the fight that comes with just surviving such an ordeal, and your fight is not in the cancer arena right now. You're in donation. Thank God you're in donation and
Hey,
transplant. Thank God.
I've always, the transplant space, that's the thing. Transplant recipients are so grateful and so committed to doing something positive post-transplant. And donor families have been through something so traumatic and can see something good out of it. And that type of gratitude on both sides is so unique in any cause. But yeah, I mean, every cause has to fight, and the policy fight is what we're up against right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for keeping us informed. We're going to do this again.
Okay.
And This conversation will be available on our YouTube channel about Transplant Life with Miss Vinnie, and I'll probably show it on our official Facebook page about Transplant Life as well. We'll make it a series so that you can be informed out there and you can know what to do. And, tonight you break it down so well, so eloquently. You make it so easy to understand. Even somebody like me can understand what's going on because, I'm screaming at the TV. What are you talking about? And Tenaya tells us what they're talking about. So thank you so much, my dear. I appreciate you so much.
You're welcome.
And I will see you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching About Transplant Life with Miss Vinnie. Like I said, this will be available on our YouTube channel. And for more information about our programs and what we do, please visit our website at abouttransplantlife.com. Thanks.